She was rejected on a Christmas blind date until a little girl asked,
Can you be my new mom?
Snow fell thick and quiet on the streets of Boston that Christmas Eve. Twinkling lights wrapped around lampposts, and carols drifted from open shop doors. Inside Green Lantern Bistro, warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. The restaurant was packed, families filled every table, children laughed between mouthfuls of pasta, and couples clinked glasses in soft candlelight. Lila Hart stood just inside the door, brushing a few snowflakes from her coat. Her emerald green dress, chosen carefully for tonight, hugged her figure gently, the color making her blue eyes stand out. Her hair fell in soft blonde waves down her shoulders, slightly damp from the snow, and a touch of hope still clung to her smile as the hostess guided her to table 9. It was her first blind date in over a year. Her best friend Rachel had been persistent. You never know, Lila. He's a decent guy, smart, single, at least meet him. So she had said yes. For a while, she sat alone, trying not to look at the time. The table was beautiful, linen cloth, a small flickering candle in a silver holder, and 2 polished wine glasses waiting to be filled. Lila checked her phone once, then again. The server came by and offered water. She smiled politely, waved it away. He was only 15 minutes late, then 20, then 35. At minute 40, Evan arrived. He was tall and well-dressed, but the moment he saw her, he sighed, an audible, disappointed breath. His eyes swept over her in a way that made her stomach tighten. He sat across from her with a slouch, didn't apologize, didn't offer an excuse. So, he said, barely glancing at the menu. You're Rachel's friend? Lila nodded, smiling nervously. Yes, and you must be. I'm Evan, he cut in, pulling out his phone to glance at a message. Look, I'll be honest. I came because my mom won't stop setting me up. She wants grandkids. I'm not really looking, especially not for someone more. He paused, waving a vague hand at her. Assertive than me. I don't do well with that, and you kind of give off that vibe. Lila's smile cracked, then disappeared altogether. I like softer types, he added with a shrug. So, yeah, no hard feelings, right? He stood before she could respond, brushing non-existent lint from his coat. Merry Christmas, he said flatly, and walked out without a backward glance. Lila sat frozen, the sounds of holiday joy swelling around her like an ocean rising to drown her. She placed her trembling hand on the edge of her dress, smoothing the fabric over her lap as if that might quiet the shaking. She turned slightly, angling her face toward the wall, away from the nearest table of laughing diners. Her throat tightened. She blinked hard. The candle between the 2 empty wine glasses flickered gently, casting golden light against her glass of water. Its small flame seemed to whisper her loneliness back to her. It was not just about Evan. It was about every dinner date that had ended in awkward silences. Every man who said, "You're great, just not for me." Every hopeful beginning that led nowhere. She had turned down an invitation to spend Christmas Eve with her family for this. For him. For a chance. She'd told herself it was okay to want love. That being 30 and single wasn't a curse. That someone, somewhere, would see her. But right now, she felt like the only woman in Boston who had been stood up on Christmas Eve. A breath caught in her chest, sharp and painful. She couldn't stay here. Not one more second. She reached for her coat, but before she could slide from her chair, a tiny voice rose from below the edge of the table. Excuse me, why are you sad? Lila looked down, startled. Standing next to her chair was a little girl, no older than 3, with soft brown curls framing her round cheeks. She wore a red velvet dress and clutched a small knitted bear in one hand. Her hazel eyes blinked up at Lila, wide and serious. Lila blinked at her, stunned. The little girl tilted her head. Do you need a hug? She asked softly, and in that moment, something in Lila's chest cracked, not from pain, but from the softest, most unexpected kind of mercy. Lila stared down at the small figure beside her chair. "Do you need a hug?" the girl asked again, her voice sweet, calm, and terribly sincere. Lila didn't know how to respond. Her heart, already cracked open, softened completely. She managed a shaky smile. "That's a very kind offer." The girl nodded solemnly. "My name is Ruby. I'm 3. She held up 3 fingers. "My daddy says hugs help, especially when someone's face looks all droopy." A soft chuckle escaped Lila before she could stop it. She blinked quickly, not trusting herself to speak. A voice came from a few feet away. Calm, low, careful. "Ruby." Lila turned her head. A man stood near a table just a few steps behind them. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with short, dark hair and a strong, gentle presence. His black knit sweater clung to broad shoulders, and his coat, still dusted with snow, was draped over the back of a chair. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes, gray with a hint of storm, were warm, concerned. He stepped forward slowly, placing one hand over Ruby's small shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he said, offering Lila a quiet, respectful nod. "Ruby's very friendly. She doesn't really understand personal boundaries yet. She's—" Lila started, her voice catching again. "She's wonderful." The man's expression softened. "I'm Adrian. Adrian Hale." Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Lila." Adrian looked at her for a moment, as if taking in the red around her eyes, the candle still flickering between the untouched wine glasses and the slight tremble in her hands. Without a word, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small pack of tissues, and set one gently on the table in front of her. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just placed it there and stepped back, a kindness so simple it made her throat tighten all over again. Then he crouched beside Ruby, getting eye level with her. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "sometimes grown-ups feel sad, and that's okay, but when someone's sad, we have to be extra kind and very gentle with them. Can you remember that?" Ruby nodded slowly. "I was being gentle. I didn't jump on her." Adrian bit back a smile. "You were very gentle." Ruby turned back to Lila, her little brow furrowed in concentration. Then, as if coming to a grand decision, she reached forward and placed one small hand on Lila's. "Do you want to eat with us?" she asked brightly. "My dad makes really good chicken." "Well, not makes. He calls and they bring it, but it tastes like he made it." Adrian's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked almost stunned. "Ruby," he began, but Lila was already laughing. The laugh caught her off guard, full and real, warming her face for the first time all night. "She's persuasive," she said softly, glancing at Adrian. He rubbed the back of his neck, visibly embarrassed. "I promise she doesn't usually invite strangers to dinner. Not since last Thanksgiving." Ruby tugged at his sleeve. "She's not a stranger. She's Lila." Adrian looked from Ruby to Lila, hesitating. "If you don't mind, we'd be happy to have you join us. No pressure, of course." Lila glanced down at Ruby's hopeful face, those wide hazel eyes still locked onto hers. There was no agenda in them, no judgment, just pure, open-hearted kindness. And in that moment, Lila felt something shift. No one had ever chosen her like this before. Not first, not so instinctively, not so simply. She looked at Adrian and then back at Ruby. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that, very much." Ruby beamed and reached for her hand again. Adrian's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time that night, Lila felt warmth from more than just the restaurant's candlelight. This was not how she imagined her Christmas Eve, but maybe, just maybe, it was how it was meant to be. The host led them to a quieter corner of the restaurant, where a small round table was tucked beneath a frosted window. Ruby immediately climbed into the center seat and patted the chairs on either side of her. "You sit here," she said to Lila, "and you sit here," to Adrian. "We're like a sandwich." Adrian raised an amused brow, pulling out Lila's chair before settling into his own. Ruby placed her bear on the table like a fourth guest and began chatting the moment they were seated. "There's a cat that lives on our street," she began, swinging her legs. "He's orange and grumpy and stole my cheese once. I named him Pudding, but Dad calls him Menace. Also, snow tastes different when you catch it with your tongue. And guess what? I saw Santa today." Lila laughed. Really laughed. For the first time that night. She glanced at Adrian and saw a faint smile playing on his lips as he gently unfolded a napkin and laid it across Ruby's lap. "Small bites, please," he said, slicing Ruby's grilled chicken into neat pieces. He reached for another napkin and laid it carefully over Lila's lap, too. "In case the snow followed you in," he said softly, almost shyly. A waiter appeared with their drinks. Adrian passed a steaming cup of tea to Lila without a word, as if it had been natural, expected. Her hands wrapped around the warmth, and she looked at him, really looked. This wasn't just a man playing father. This was a man who had fully become one. Ruby munched on a fry, then turned to Lila with her mouth full. "Do you know what I really want for Christmas?" Lila smiled. "What's that?" "A mommy," Ruby said brightly. "Can you be mine?" The question dropped into the space between them like a pebble in still water. Adrian froze. Lila blinked, stunned. Even Ruby seemed to realize something had shifted. She looked up at her father, then back at Lila, waiting. Lila cleared her throat, reaching gently to tuck a strand of hair behind Ruby's ear. I don't know, sweet girl," she said carefully. "But you're so wonderful. I think anyone would want to be part of your family." Ruby accepted the answer with a small nod, though her eyes remained hopeful. Adrian let out a slow breath and met Lila's gaze. Apologetic. "She doesn't fully understand what happened," he said, his voice low. "She was only one when her mom passed. Sometimes she talks like this and He trailed off, looking down at his hands. "I don't always know how to handle it." There was something in the way he said it, not just an apology, but a confession. One that carried the weight of being both a parent and a man, terrified to open his heart again. Lila gave a gentle nod. "You're doing better than you think." He looked up at her then, really looked, and she felt something stir in her chest, not romantic yet, but deeply human. Recognition, respect. Ruby, oblivious to the tension, reached for a piece of bread and nibbled it. Lila slid her hand across the table and gently clasped Ruby's small fingers. "You're doing okay too, you know," she whispered. Ruby turned to Adrian, beaming. "Daddy, she's not sad anymore. I did it. I fixed her." Adrian's face softened completely. He looked at his daughter, then at Lila. The woman his daughter had somehow pulled into their lives like a beam of light on the darkest night of the year. And in that one shared glance, something passed between them. No promises, no expectations. Just a moment of quiet, mutual understanding, gratitude, connection, and the beginning of something that neither of them had seen coming. Lila squeezed Ruby's hand, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in a very long time. Some meals started with menus and ended with bills. But this one had started with heartbreak, and somehow become the beginning of home. The second time they met was quieter. A small coffee shop overlooked the slow-moving Charles River, its windows fogged from the warmth inside and the cold December afternoon outside. Adrian arrived early. Lila was already there. They chose a corner table by the window. No one else was around except a young barista humming a carol softly. Ruby was with Helen for the afternoon. Adrian held his cup in both hands and looked at the water, silent for a long while before he spoke. "Her name was Lena," he began, voice low. "We met in college. She was wild and brave and always late." A slight smile tugged at his lips, but it did not reach his eyes. 3 years ago she was hit by a drunk driver. Just like that she was gone. No goodbyes. Ruby was still learning how to say mama. Lila said nothing, but her hand curled gently around the ceramic mug in front of her. "I did not know how to grieve and be a father at the same time," Adrian continued. "So, I did the only thing I knew. I built walls, around myself, around Ruby, around everything." He finally looked at her. "That night at the bistro, when Ruby reached for you, I saw something crack open. and it terrified me. There was no theatrics in his voice, no dramatic flair, just honesty, the kind that only comes from pain lived through. Lila met his eyes. "You're not the only one afraid of trying again." She looked down at the table. "I've never had what you had," she admitted. "Most of the men I dated, they saw me as an option, something temporary, like I was never quite enough for the long run." She took a breath. "After a while, you start believing it, that maybe you're the problem, that maybe you're not lovable in the way people want." Adrian didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her with words. He simply reached forward, not to touch her, but to turn the silver spoon lying on the table toward her. "Look at the reflection," he said softly. The polished metal bent her image just slightly, but her eyes were still hers, bright, wounded, real. "If they couldn't see your worth, they were not the ones who deserved to," he said. "Sometimes it's not about changing yourself. Sometimes it's about changing who you give your heart to." The words sank deep. Lila blinked quickly, her throat tight. She turned her face to the window so he wouldn't see the tear that escaped. Moments later, the bell above the door chimed softly. Helen entered, hand in hand with Ruby, who ran straight toward Lila with a squeal. "Miss me?" Lila laughed and opened her arms. "Always." Ruby scrambled into her lap like she belonged there, and maybe, in some quiet way, she did. She nestled in, warm and safe, and within minutes, her eyelids began to flutter closed. Lila's arms tightened gently around the small bundle. Her cheek rested against Ruby's hair. Adrian watched, something shifting behind his eyes. He had not realized how naturally Lila fit into their life. Not like a replacement, but like a melody they hadn't known was missing from their song. And yet, along with that realization, came something else. Fear. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of Ruby's hair from her cheek. "I'm scared," he said suddenly. "Scared of letting myself feel this. Scared that if I let someone in again, and lose them, I don't know if I could take it." His voice cracked at the edges, vulnerable in a way Lila had never seen before. She looked up at him, one arm still cradling Ruby, her voice low. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "But maybe we can be scared and still try." It wasn't a grand promise. It wasn't an easy answer. But it was enough. Outside, the river glistened beneath a fading sky, and inside that quiet coffee shop, something small, delicate, and real began to grow. Not loud or perfect, but honest. Something like hope. In the weeks that followed, Lila became a gentle presence in the rhythm of Adrian and Ruby's life. It started with small things. A bedtime story, where she did all the voices, witches, wolves, and a grumpy dragon Ruby named after her neighbor's cat. Then came mornings, when Lila helped Ruby find a missing sock or tied her ponytail just right. 2 loops and a twist, not too tight. Sometimes Adrian stood in the hallway, coffee in hand, watching Lila lean down to kiss the top of Ruby's head before zipping her coat. They would walk her to preschool together, the 3 of them laughing in the crisp air, Ruby skipping between them, swinging their hands. There were no labels, just quiet warmth. A routine that began to feel like home. Adrian, normally guarded, started noticing things. The way Lila tilted her head while listening to Ruby's stories. How calmly she handled tantrums, not with lectures, but gentle presence. How she'd silently place a glass of water beside his laptop during late work nights. She fit, not like a guest, like someone who had always belonged. Then, one Saturday, Helen arrived. Adrian's mother was sharp, elegant, and rarely needed to raise her voice. She came bearing gifts for Ruby and expectations wrapped just as tightly. Lila greeted her warmly. Helen returned the courtesy, but with watchful eyes. At first, she stayed reserved, watching as Lila helped Ruby with a puzzle. But as the visit unfolded, her scrutiny softened. She noticed the quiet gestures, Lila wiping chocolate from Ruby's chin, reminding her to say, "Please." And most telling of all, the way Ruby reached for Lila's hand without thinking. Later, In the kitchen, while Lila refilled a juice glass, Helen turned to Adrian. "She's gentle," she said softly. "Ruby responds to that." Adrian only nodded. Helen looked toward the kitchen, then added, "Just make sure fear doesn't keep you from seeing what's already growing." It was at preschool that things shifted again. Adrian picked up Ruby one afternoon. Her teacher, Miss Carr, smiled as she handed him a crayon drawing of stick figures. "This is Ruby's family," she said. She told the class it's her dad, her grandma Helen, and she flipped the paper. In wobbly letters it read, "And my new mommy, Lila." Adrian stood frozen. Lila hadn't asked for that. She hadn't even been there. And yet, she was the name Ruby chose. When Lila heard about the drawing later, she didn't speak. Her lips trembled. Her eyes shimmered. She rarely cried. But this gentle undoing was too much to hold. That night, she stood by her bedroom window, watching snow fall like it had that first night. She realized she was in deep. Not just with Ruby, with Adrian, too. And that scared her more than she could admit. She began pulling back, just a little. She declined dinners, shortened visits, answered texts slower. Adrian noticed. He didn't press. But he felt the shift. One evening, after Ruby had fallen asleep, he found Lila folding laundry at the dining table. She looked up, surprised. "You're drifting," he said gently. "I don't want to assume, but I need to ask, is it because of me?" Lila's hands stilled on a tiny sweater. "I think I'm falling for this life," she said. "For her, for you, and I'm terrified I'm not enough." Adrian walked over, slow and steady. "You don't have to be perfect," he said quietly. "You just have to be real." She looked up at him, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. They were two people standing in the middle of something unexpected, something fragile, maybe, but honest. The kind of real you could build a home around. The holiday fundraiser was held at the historic Belmont Estate, a grand, glittering affair hosted by friends of Adrian's late wife. It was a sea of polished shoes, champagne flutes, and polite smiles. Lila stood beside Adrian in a navy blue dress, her hair curled gently over her shoulders. Ruby twirled nearby in a sparkly gold dress, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Everything was going fine, until it wasn't. Ruby ran up to a small group of adults, laughing, and proudly declared, "That's my mommy," pointing to Lila without hesitation. The words, innocent and bright, sliced through the air like glass. The women in the group smiled politely, some exchanging glances. One of them whispered something under her breath. Adrian caught the name Lena. He froze. Before Lila could react, Adrian reached for her arm and gently but firmly pulled her aside, guiding her down a quiet hallway, away from the chandeliers and murmurs. His voice was low but trembling. I am sorry. I did not expect that." Lila blinked, unsure where this was going. "She's just a child," she said softly. "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But these people, they were Lena's friends." And hearing Ruby say that, I panicked. Lila's eyes searched his. "Are you ashamed of me?" "No," he said quickly. "It is not you. It is the idea of Ruby thinking you're a replacement, like I am erasing Lena. I am not ready for her to think that." The words landed heavy. Lila swallowed. Then maybe I am the only one who was building something. She turned, walked back through the party alone, her steps steady, but her heart cracked in two. Adrian did not follow. That night, Lila sat by her window, watching snow tap gently against the glass. She placed her hand on her chest, where it ached, not because of the rejection, but because she finally understood. She had let herself be chosen, and it hurt to feel unchosen again. The next morning, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find no one, only a small envelope taped gently to the handle. Inside was a folded card, the front decorated with crayon hearts and stick figures. In uneven letters it read, "I want you to be my mommy, not the old one, a new one. Love, Ruby. Tears blurred her vision. Inside the envelope was something else, her left glove. The one she had lost at the fundraiser, now returned, neatly folded. She held it close to her chest. She was not crying because she was hurt. She was crying because someone had remembered, because a child had chosen her. Again, and this time, it mattered more than anything. That evening, she heard footsteps on the stairs. She opened the door before he could knock. Adrian stood there. No umbrella, snow collecting on his dark coat, his hair damp, his eyes unguarded. He took a shaky breath. "I messed up," he said. Lila said nothing. "Just let him speak. I was scared. Scared that by letting Ruby love you that way, I was betraying Lena. Scared that I was moving too fast. Or worse, scared that I was feeling too much." He paused, the words hanging in the cold air. "But the truth is, I choose you, Lila. Not to replace anyone, but to build something new. Together." A tear slipped down her cheek, not because she was sad, but because someone had finally spoken the words her heart had been waiting to hear. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, not as a guest in his life, but as someone who finally belonged. The snow had returned to Boston, quiet and soft like a memory finding its way home. Lights twinkled along the windows of the Green Lantern Bistro, casting a golden hue on the sidewalks outside. Inside, the familiar warmth wrapped around Lila Hart like a blanket as she stepped through the door, her heart drumming gently in her chest. She saw him immediately. Adrian stood near table number 9, the table, the one where she had once sat alone, holding back tears under the flicker of a single candle. Tonight, it looked different, not because the table had changed, but because she was no longer alone. "Hi," she said, her voice steady but soft. He smiled, nervous in a way that was oddly charming. "Hi." Lila glanced at the table. 2 place settings, and a third smaller one with a coloring book and a set of crayons neatly arranged. Adrian gestured to the chair across from him. "I thought it was time to come full circle." She sat down, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "You remembered the table." "I remembered the woman who sat here," he said, "and how she chose to stay, even when the night could have broken her." The waiter brought hot cider for both of them and a bowl of macaroni for the little girl who would soon be joining them. Adrian took a slow breath. "I didn't bring a ring." Lila blinked, slightly taken aback. "Because I'm not asking for a proposal," he continued. "I'm asking for something more than that." She held his gaze. "Lila, will you become our family? Not as a replacement, not as someone to fill a gap, but as the woman who makes our lives more full, more real, more home." Her hand trembled slightly as she brought it to her mouth. Adrian leaned in, his voice lower. "We are not asking you to forget who you are. We are asking you to bring all of who you are into who we are." A small burst of energy arrived just then, red velvet dress swishing as Ruby ran from the front entrance and straight to Lila. She wrapped her arms tightly around Lila's legs. "Miss Lila," Ruby whispered, tilting her head back to look up with big, pleading eyes. "Do you want to be my new mommy now?" Lila bent down slowly, her eyes already brimming. "I've been waiting for you to ask," she whispered, and then she nodded. "Yes. Yes to the little girl who chose her twice. Yes to the man who had the courage to open his heart again. Yes to the family she never thought she would find. Sitting at a table she once thought would mark the loneliest night of her life. As Ruby squealed in delight, hugging her tighter, Adrian reached across the table and gently took Lila's free hand. She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was no fear behind her smile. Only peace, only belonging, and just like that, the table that once held sadness now held something sacred. A beginning. Morning light filtered softly through the kitchen windows, dusting everything with a golden glow. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon hung thick in the air, along with the sound of giggles and clattering spoons. Ruby stood proudly on a step stool, wearing an oversized chef's hat that kept sliding down over her eyes. Batter dotted her cheeks, and her small hands worked diligently to stir the mix in a big green bowl. "Celebration pancakes," she announced, voice full of triumph. "Extra sprinkles today. For the party." Adrian leaned against the counter nearby, wearing a plain white t-shirt and a navy apron dusted with flour. His sleeves were rolled up, and his smile was easy, nothing like the buttoned-up CEO the world knew. This was him, as he really was. At home, across the kitchen, Lila set the table, gently placing a flower in a small glass vase. Her movements were peaceful, natural, like someone who had belonged there all along. As Ruby began pouring batter, most of it missing the pan, Helen Hale entered the room. Her heels clicked against the tile as she took in the chaos. Flour on the floor, syrup already spilled, Ruby humming a holiday song slightly off-key. Lila turned and straightened slightly, unsure how to read the older woman's expression. But Helen smiled. She walked toward Lila, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and said in a calm, steady voice, "Welcome to the family, dear." Lila's eyes watered. It was not a grand gesture, not a speech, but it was all she had needed. Recognition, acceptance, a door opening instead of closing. They all gathered around the table as Ruby climbed onto her booster seat. A tower of slightly lopsided pancakes sat at the center, crowned with a generous handful of whipped cream and a lopsided strawberry. Ruby picked up her tiny glass of milk, stood precariously on her chair, and raised it high. "I want to make a toast," she declared seriously. Everyone stilled. Ruby cleared her throat dramatically. "To my new family, and to Mommy Lila." Adrian's breath caught. Lila blinked rapidly, her hand slowly rising to cover her heart. Helen raised her coffee mug with a small nod, and even the usually composed Adrian found himself wiping at his eye. Ruby beamed, then sat down and began devouring her pancakes with all the grace of a storm. Lila watched her, watched them, and felt something inside her shift. She thought back to that cold Christmas night not so long ago. The table, the rejection, the silence, the overwhelming feeling that perhaps love had forgotten her entirely. But it had not. It had simply taken a detour. She had not been abandoned. She had been led to a curious little girl with a red velvet dress and a heart wide enough to welcome a stranger. Led to a man who chose to love not because he had to, but because he saw her. Lila reached out, gently tucking Ruby's hair behind her ear, then looked across the table at Adrian, who gave her a look that said everything without a word. This was not a perfect family. It was their family, not born of blood, but of courage, of choosing, of daring to open the door again. And sometimes, just sometimes, the one who chooses you is a 3-year-old in a frosting-covered apron, holding your whole future in her sticky little hands. The camera of life zoomed out slowly as laughter filled the kitchen and snow began to fall once again outside the window. This time, it did not feel cold. It felt like home. If this story warmed your heart, we invite you to stay with us for more moments like this, moments that remind us of the quiet miracles of love, second chances, and the families we choose. At Soul Stirring Stories, we believe that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from broken places. If Ruby, Lila, and Adrian's journey touched you, don't forget to hit that hype button to show your love, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that heal, inspire, and remind you that you're never truly alone. Thank you for watching. We're grateful to have you here.
Isabel Monroe had never belonged in this world of luxury. By day, she worked at a small art gallery in Brooklyn, curating exhibits for up-and-coming artists. By night, she managed a cozy book cafe, a second home filled with the comforting scent of coffee and the warmth of aged wooden shelves. She loved her work, but there were dreams she had never dared to chase. Becoming an interior designer, creating beautiful spaces, was a passion she had long since set aside in favor of practicality. Tonight, she had a blind date, one arranged by her best friend Mia. Mia had always insisted that Isabel spent too much time working and not enough time living. "He seems like a great guy," Mia had said. "Give yourself a chance." But when Isabel stepped into the restaurant, she didn't see the man she was supposed to meet. Instead, she chose the wrong table and found herself sitting across from Ethan Lancaster. Ethan Lancaster wasn't just any businessman. He was the CEO of Lancaster Holdings, one of the most powerful financial firms in New York. He graced the covers of business magazines, known in the industry as a master strategist, a man of precision and control. He was not the type to go on casual blind dates, and he was certainly not the man Isabel was supposed to meet tonight. But she didn't know that yet. Isabel pulled out the chair, offering a small, polite smile. "Sorry I'm late. I'm Isabel." Ethan looked up from his wine glass, his gaze cool yet intrigued. "Are you now?" A conversation began. A small mistake, but the start of something far bigger than either of them could have anticipated. Ethan Lancaster wasn't one to waste time on meaningless conversations, and yet the woman sitting across from him had somehow made him break his own rules. Isabel Monroe was unlike anyone he had ever met. She wasn't trying to impress him or win his approval. No forced smiles, no carefully crafted questions about his wealth or status, just honest stories about her life. She spoke about her work at the art gallery, how she loved helping young artists showcase their talent. She described the book cafe she managed in the evenings, a cozy haven where people could lose themselves in old novels over a cup of coffee. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't glance at his phone like he usually did in social settings. Instead, he found himself drawn to the quiet passion in her voice, the way she spoke about building something meaningful, though she never admitted it outright. "And what about you?" Isabel asked, sipping her wine. Ethan smirked slightly. "Finance." "Sounds rented." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps? Most people either tried to impress him or grew intimidated when they realized who he was. But not Isabel. She was simply herself. Time slipped by faster than they realized. When dessert arrived, Isabel chuckled softly. "I've been talking too much. Your turn. What do you do when you're not working?" Ethan hesitated before replying. "I analyze investments and look for new opportunities." She frowned. "That's still work." His lips quirked, but he said nothing more. Then Isabel's phone buzzed. Mia's name flashing on the screen. She glanced down at the message and her breath hitched. "Hey, so sorry. Your date got canceled. He couldn't make it." "Rain check?" Isabel froze, the color draining from her face. She slowly lifted her gaze to Ethan, realization dawning. And the strangest part? Ethan had known all along. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Isabel stared at Ethan, then back at the text message on her phone, her brain scrambling to piece everything together. I think there's been a mistake," she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table as she felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. Ethan tilted his head slightly, as if observing her reaction with amusement. "Oh? And what mistake would that be?" She picked up her water glass, gripping it like a lifeline. I don't think I was supposed to sit here. I was actually supposed to meet someone else, but that date got canceled, and I had no idea. It seems I sat at the wrong table," Ethan finished for her, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Heat rushed to her face. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I've wasted your time." Ethan slowly set his wine glass down, leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "How interesting." She frowned. "What's interesting?" His sharp gray eyes studied her. "You never asked who I was, never tried to impress me or make me feel important. For the past hour, you were just yourself." She swallowed. "I thought that's how conversations were supposed to work." "No, Isabel, not in my world." There was something in the way he said it that made her heartbeat stutter, but her rational mind screamed that this situation was entirely too strange. "Either way, I should go. I really am sorry for the mix-up, and thank you for being patient with me." Isabel rose quickly, but before she could turn away, Ethan's deep voice stopped her. "Stay." She froze. "What?" He stood as well, his towering presence making her feel small. "We had a good evening, and I see no reason to end it just because of a small misunderstanding. You can leave, or you can stay and see where this goes." Everything in her told her to walk away, but her heart whispered something else. She took a slow breath and sat back down. Isabel didn't know why she stayed. She should have left. She should have walked out, gone home, and laughed about this bizarre mix-up with Mia. But instead, she remained. Ethan's smirk deepened, as if he had known she would. He signaled the waiter for another pour of wine, his gray eyes sharp yet unreadable. "You'd like to have things planned, don't you?" he asked, voice steady. Isabel nodded. "I don't like surprises." "Then tonight must be a rather interesting exception." They kept talking, and slowly Isabel relaxed again. Ethan had a way of listening that made her feel as if the world had faded away, as if what she said truly mattered. But the moment they stepped out of the restaurant, reality came crashing back. Flashbulbs exploded. The rapid clicks of cameras filled the air. Isabel flinched, momentarily blinded. "What is happening?" She stepped back instinctively. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her lower back, guiding her through the chaos. "Just the press, they always follow me." "Follow you?" she echoed, still dazed. He opened the car door for her. "Get in, we'll talk inside." She hesitated. She barely knew him. But something in his tone, in his eyes, made her trust him. So she stepped inside. The door shut behind them, sealing them off from the frenzy outside. Isabel turned to face Ethan, her mind racing. "Who are you, really?" He tilted his head slightly, lips curving. "You haven't figured it out yet?" Her fingers hovered over her phone before she typed his name into the search bar. Results flooded the screen instantly. Ethan Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Holdings, one of New York's youngest billionaires, a man Wall Street both feared and respected. Her heart pounded. This wasn't just an accidental encounter. She had just stepped into an entirely different world. The car glided smoothly through the streets of Manhattan, the city lights flickering across the tinted windows. Isabel clutched her phone tightly, eyes scanning the endless stream of articles about Ethan Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Holdings, a billionaire, one of Wall Street's most powerful figures. She took a slow breath before turning to face him. "Why didn't you tell me from the start?" He tilted his head slightly, his smirk unmistakable. "And ruin a perfectly good evening?" Isabel shook her head, still struggling to process everything. This is insane. I'm just a normal person. I don't belong in this world." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "The world doesn't matter. What matters is whether you want to be part of it." Her heart stilled for a beat. A part of her wanted to run, to get out of the car and return to her normal life, a life without flashing cameras, without speculation, without her name being whispered in elite circles. But another part of her wanted to stay. The car pulled up in front of her apartment building. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Don't decide now," he said calmly. "Go home, get some rest. If you want to see me again, you'll know where to find me." Isabel reached for the door handle, but before stepping out, she hesitated. "Do you really think this could work?" His smile was knowing. "I never bet on something I don't believe has a chance to win." She stepped out, closing the door behind her. But as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, a realization hit her. She had only just met Ethan Lancaster, yet he had already shaken everything she thought she knew about herself. And the scariest part, she wasn't sure she hated it. For the next few days, Isabel tried to return to normal. She buried herself in work at the art gallery, preparing for an upcoming exhibit. In the evenings, she went back to her book cafe, brewing lattes for familiar faces, trying to ignore the fact that she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan Lancaster. But forgetting him became impossible when he walked straight into her world. One late afternoon, amidst the warm glow of the cafe and the scent of fresh coffee, Ethan stepped inside as if he had every right to be there. Gone was the sharp three-piece suit from the magazines. He wore a black sweater and dark jeans, effortlessly casual, yet no less captivating. Isabel looked up from behind the counter, her heart skipping a beat. "What are you doing here?" Ethan rested his hands on the wooden counter, his gaze never leaving hers. "I wanted coffee." "And I wanted to see you." She arched a brow. "You can get coffee anywhere." His lips curved slightly. "But I can't see you just anywhere." She opened her mouth to protest but stopped. There was something in the way he looked at her, the patience, the quiet certainty, that made her realize Ethan Lancaster wasn't the kind of man to walk away from something he wanted. And right now, that something seemed to be her. They sat together in a quiet corner of the cafe, the spot where Isabel usually read after hours. Ethan didn't talk about work. He didn't bring up the differences in their worlds. He only asked her about the little things. Her favorite book, a cafe she'd always wanted to visit, the dream she once had but never chased. Slowly, Isabel realized he wasn't just trying to get to know her. He wanted her to understand that, despite everything that set them apart, she wasn't a mistake. She wasn't a fleeting distraction. And for the first time, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he meant it. In the days that followed, Ethan Lancaster slowly became a part of Isabel's world. He showed up at the art gallery, watching from a quiet distance as she explained abstract paintings to customers. He sat at her book cafe, reading in a dimly lit corner while she worked behind the counter. Every time their eyes met, he would offer the same small smile. Patient, unhurried, like he was willing to wait until she realized she wanted this too. And slowly she did, but the world outside wasn't so simple. One morning, Isabel opened her phone, only for a headline to make her stomach drop. The mystery woman beside Ethan Lancaster, just another passing fling? She scrolled down, her heart sinking as the article dissected every aspect of her life, her job, her background, the undeniable gap between her and Ethan. Setting her phone down, she felt an uneasy weight settle in her chest. The words on the screen blurred as her mind raced. Would this ruin everything? Would her life be reduced to nothing but a headline? It wasn't just the words in the article, it was the reminder of something she had tried to ignore. They came from two vastly different worlds. That afternoon, when Ethan arrived at the cafe, she couldn't hide the hesitation in her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, studying her carefully. "What are we doing, Ethan?" Isabel sighed. "You're Ethan Lancaster. I'm just me. The press, the world, they all look at me like I don't belong in your life." Ethan was quiet for a moment before he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Are you in love with them?" She blinked. "What?" "Are you in love with the people out there?" he repeated. "Because if you're not, then why do you care what they think?" She didn't have an answer. Because deep down, she knew he was right. Isabel couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words. He had said it so simply, as if the answer had always been there, she just hadn't been ready to see it. She didn't love the world out there. She didn't love the strangers behind their keyboards, the headlines twisting reality into whatever narrative they pleased. But did she love Ethan? One evening, with the New York skyline glowing against the night, Ethan took her somewhere unexpected. A vacant building, stripped down to bare steel beams and wooden floors. But as Isabel stepped inside, she realized it wasn't just any space. "Do you know what this is?" Ethan asked, standing beside her, gazing out into the open space. She shook her head. "It's my new project," he said. "I want to turn this place into a luxury hotel, but there's one problem. I haven't found anyone with the right vision to design it." Isabel turned to him, her heart pounding. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you want to chase your dream, you don't have to wait anymore." His voice was steady, sure. "You can start right here." She opened her mouth, but before she could respond, Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Isabel froze. "I don't just want you to design this hotel, Isabel. I want you by my side. Every day, every moment. Not just as a designer, not just for a season, but for a lifetime. I want you to be my partner in everything. Forever. He flicked the box open, a ring glimmering in the dim light. Marry me. The world slowed. Everything had led to this. The mistake, the late-night conversations, the moments of hesitation, the undeniable pull between them, it had all brought her here. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but absolute certainty. Taking a deep breath, she reached for his hand. Yes. Just days after the proposal, Isabel Monroe officially became Isabel Lancaster. There was no grand wedding with hundreds of guests, no media, no flashing cameras, just an intimate ceremony, a moment that belonged only to them. Ethan held her hands, his eyes never once leaving hers, and when the officiant asked the most important question, he didn't hesitate. I do. Isabel looked into those sharp gray eyes, the eyes that had seen her in a way no one else ever had. And she whispered back, I do. The vows were spoken, the ring was on her finger, and as Ethan leaned in to kiss her, she knew there was nothing in this world she would ever regret about this choice. A year later, Isabel Lancaster's first hotel opened its doors. The press called it the New York Interior Design Revolution, but to Isabel, it was something far greater. It was proof of everything she had once feared and everything she had chosen to embrace. Ethan stood beside her at the grand opening, his hand resting lightly on her back. Proud of me, Isabel teased, a playful smile on her lips. He tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. Always. The camera flashes went off. Reporters called out questions, but this time Isabel didn't care. She had learned that the world outside didn't matter. What mattered was the man holding her hand. Because sometimes, one small mistake, like sitting at the wrong table, could change your entire life. Ethan Blackwood never believed in love. To him, marriage was nothing more than a tool, a way to consolidate power. But when his fiancée, Vanessa Sterling, betrayed him just days before their wedding, he realized marriage could also be a weapon. Vanessa had mocked him. She thought he would be broken, devastated at the sight of her running off with another man. But Ethan wasn't the kind of man to be humiliated so easily. If Vanessa wanted to play games, he would play on his own terms. And Isla Whitmore was the perfect pawn for his revenge. A simple maid with no status, no family name, someone Vanessa had always looked down upon. What better way to get back at her than to marry the one person she deemed beneath her? So, the day after his breakup with Vanessa, Ethan announced his engagement to Isla. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. I want you to be my wife. His voice was cold, unyielding. Isla's eyes widened in shock. Are you joking? I never joke. Ethan didn't love Isla. She was nothing more than a means to an end. But what he didn't know was that this decision would change his life forever. The wedding was quick and cold, devoid of love or emotion, nothing more than a business deal. Ethan didn't care if Isla's dress was beautiful, nor did he acknowledge the stunned looks from the guests as she walked down the aisle. To him, this was just another chess move, and Isla was the perfect pawn to drive Vanessa insane. Vanessa was there. She wore an extravagant gown, standing among the guests with a cold smirk. Isla could feel the disdain in her gaze, but it didn't matter, because Ethan didn't even spare his bride a glance. The ceremony was brief, their vows spoken like a script. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan simply took Isla's hand, sliding the ring onto her finger with no warmth, no tenderness. After the ceremony, Isla assumed she would be given her own room, but Ethan suddenly pulled her close, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "You'll be sleeping in my bed." Isla froze, her eyes widening in shock. Why? Ethan's gaze flickered toward Vanessa, a smirk playing on his lips. Because she's watching. A pang of realization struck Isla. So this was all just to get back at Vanessa. When they arrived at the Blackwood estate, Isla still struggled to accept the reality that she would have to share a bed with a man who didn't love her. But Ethan didn't care about her feelings. He shrugged off his jacket, leaned back against the bed, and said casually, "Don't overthink this, Isla. This is just an act, and you need to play your role well." Isla clenched her fists, her mind in turmoil. She never thought her life would change so drastically in just one night. Isla couldn't sleep. The room was too large, too unfamiliar, and the man lying beside her was even more unsettling. Ethan Blackwood, her husband by title, yet a complete stranger to her. He lay on his back, one arm draped over his forehead, eyes half closed. But Isla knew he wasn't asleep. After what felt like an eternity, Isla turned onto her side, keeping as much distance from Ethan as possible. As she shifted, the blanket slipped slightly, revealing a faint scar on her shoulder. Ethan's eyes snapped open. It wasn't an ordinary scar. It was thin, slightly raised, as if it had been there for years. In the dim glow of the night, fragments of a forgotten memory resurfaced. A river, a boy struggling against a powerful current, a girl diving in, risking everything to pull him to safety. And then, when he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was blood, trickling from a fresh wound on her shoulder. Ethan's pulse pounded. Slowly, he propped himself up on one elbow, his sharp gaze fixed on Isla. Could she be that girl? But Isla seemed unaware of his sudden change in demeanor. She simply pulled the blanket higher, turning her back to him, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside his mind. Ethan couldn't look away from that scar. He remembered it vividly. The girl who saved him had promised she would never forget him. But when he had returned to find her, she was gone. Could it really be her? Ethan clenched his jaw, his thoughts tangled. He couldn't jump to conclusions just yet. He needed to be sure. Ethan was not a man who easily fixated on things, but ever since their wedding night, he couldn't stop thinking about the scar on Isla's shoulder. He remembered it too well. It was the same injury the girl who had saved him bore all those years ago. But one scar wasn't enough. Ethan needed more proof. So he began paying close attention to Isla, silently observing her every habit, every reaction. And slowly, fragments of lost memories started falling into place. First clue: Isla had a very distinct habit. Whenever she was nervous, she would fiddle with a small silver necklace, turning the pendant between her fingers. Ethan remembered the girl from his past had the same habit, holding on to a similar necklace whenever she was anxious. Second clue: Isla loved nature. One morning, Ethan walked through the garden and saw Isla barefoot on the grass, eyes closed, as if relishing the sensation. The sight hit him like a wave of déjà vu. The girl who had saved him also loved walking barefoot, once saying that it made her feel free. Third clue: Isla reacted strangely when he mentioned the river. During dinner one evening, Ethan casually asked, "Do you like swimming?" Isla froze for a fraction of a second, her eyes flickering with something unreadable before shaking her head. "No, I don't really like water." Ethan stared at her, heart pounding. The girl from his past had almost drowned while saving him. Maybe that fear had stayed with her. Fourth clue: Isla had an unconscious reflex. One night, Ethan accidentally dropped a glass, the sharp sound shattering the quiet air. Isla flinched violently, and by instinct her hand flew to her left shoulder, where her scar was. Ethan stilled. That was exactly how the girl from his past had reacted when he had asked about her injury. Ethan had no more doubts. Isla was the girl who had once saved his life. But she didn't recognize him. Or maybe she had forgotten everything. Ethan wasn't going to tell her just yet. But the realization consumed him. Every time he looked at Isla, he could no longer see just the maid he married out of revenge. He saw the girl who had once risked everything for him. He wanted to understand why she had ended up here, why she didn't remember him, and most of all, why fate had brought them back together like this. Was it just coincidence? Or had he unknowingly spent his whole life searching for her? Ethan had never believed in fate, but some things were too coincidental to ignore. For weeks he had watched Isla, gathering every clue to confirm what he already suspected, that she was the girl who had once risked her life to save him. But she didn't remember him. Or maybe she had forgotten everything. That night, as Isla was preparing for bed, Ethan spoke up suddenly. "Do you believe in fate?" Isla hesitated. It was the first time Ethan had ever spoken to her like this. There was no coldness, no authority, just quiet contemplation, as if he had been carrying something heavy in his mind. "I've never really thought about it," Isla answered truthfully. Ethan watched her intently, his fingers unconsciously brushing against the scar on her shoulder. Isla tensed, stepping back slightly, but Ethan's gaze never left her. "Do you remember ever saving someone?" His voice was low. Isla frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up, moving closer to her. He locked eyes with her, his voice calm but firm. "Years ago, I fell into a river. I struggled against the freezing current, convinced I was going to die, until a girl jumped in and pulled me out." Isla froze. "She got hurt saving me." Ethan's fingers traced the faint scar on her shoulder. "Right here." The world stood still. Isla's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat as fragments of forgotten memories suddenly rushed back. A river, a terrified boy, a promise. "We've met before." Ethan's voice was rough. "You saved me, and I promised I'd marry you." Isla took a shaky step back, clutching the fabric of her nightgown. "No, that can't be." Ethan didn't push her. He simply watched, letting her piece together the memories herself. And then Isla remembered. She remembered the boy with piercing blue eyes, remembered that cold afternoon when she had dragged him onto the riverbank, trembling from the icy water. She remembered how he had stared at her, gratitude shining in his gaze. And she remembered his promise. "One day, when I grow up, I'll marry you." Isla raised a hand to her mouth, her heart pounding. The boy she had once saved was now the man she had married. Ethan took a deep breath, a rare softness flickering in his eyes. "I don't know why fate brought us back together like this, but I do know one thing." He paused, his gaze steady. "I'm not going to lose you again." Isla couldn't sleep. The entire night she lay awake, her mind spinning with memories that had just resurfaced. Ethan was the boy she had saved all those years ago, the boy with deep blue eyes, the one who had held onto her hand on the riverbank, innocently promising to marry her someday. She had forgotten. She had truly forgotten that promise. But Ethan hadn't. He had remembered. He had even searched for her. Isla gripped the blanket tightly, her emotions tangled. Ethan had always been a mystery to her. Since the day they married, he had never shown his true emotions, never looked at her as a real wife. So why now, when she looked at him, did everything suddenly feel different? In the days that followed, Isla started to change. She tried to keep her distance from Ethan, but the more she avoided him, the more she found herself drawn to him. She began noticing the little things about him, the way he drank his coffee black but always left a sugar cube untouched on the saucer, the way his fingers idly tapped against the table when he was deep in thought, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. Their private moments started to feel different, like the way Ethan's hand would gently rest on her back while guiding her through a crowd, or the way his gaze stayed on her just a second too long. She no longer saw him as cold and distant. Ethan no longer kept his walls up, as if he was patiently waiting for her to realize something. But what unsettled Isla the most was herself. Why did her heart race whenever Ethan was near? Why did she feel an inexplicable disappointment when he wasn't at breakfast? Why did his gaze make her feel things she never expected to? One late night, Isla sat by the window, staring at the distant city lights, lost in thought. She had believed this marriage was just an act, a way for Ethan to spite Vanessa, a contract devoid of real emotions. But now, Isla wasn't so sure. Ethan never pushed her. He never demanded she feel anything for him. But his patience, his quiet kindness, the way he looked at her, it was impossible to ignore. And that terrified her. Falling in love meant being vulnerable. It meant risking heartbreak. Isla had spent years surviving, keeping her heart guarded. She had convinced herself that love wasn't meant for people like her, that she was only here because of circumstance. But every time Ethan looked at her, every time his fingers brushed against hers, she felt something shift. Maybe, just maybe, she wanted to stay. In the days that followed, something shifted between Isla and Ethan. She no longer avoided his gaze, and Ethan, instead of keeping his distance, began creating moments of closeness between them. They were no longer just two people bound by a marriage of convenience. In the mornings, Isla would find a cup of tea waiting for her, the exact kind she liked. Ethan never mentioned it, but she knew it was him. At events, Ethan always rested a hand on the small of her back, light yet firm, a silent reassurance that she wasn't alone. Their conversations became effortless. Isla no longer felt the need to be guarded around him. Instead, Ethan always listened, as if every word she spoke mattered to him. And then, there were moments that made Isla realize something had changed. One evening, she stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air, only to find Ethan already there. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice deep and soothing in the quiet night. Isla shook her head. They stood side by side, saying nothing, just gazing out at the city below. Yet there was something peaceful about the silence between them, something that no longer felt like distance, but comfort. A cool breeze swept through, making Isla shiver. Before she could react, Ethan shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She glanced up, startled by the simple but intimate gesture. Ethan said nothing, but his eyes, the way he looked at her, they spoke louder than words ever could. Slowly, Isla began to understand. She no longer avoided him. She no longer denied the emotions growing inside her. She had once thought this marriage was a mistake. But now, Isla began to wonder, was it fate that had brought her back to Ethan? And now she had a choice to make. Isla spent the entire night thinking. She knew she couldn't keep running anymore. Ethan had said the words she had been too afraid to admit. She wasn't staying because of the past. She wasn't staying because of a childhood promise. She was staying because of him. But if Isla truly accepted that, if she truly let herself love again, what would it mean for her? The next morning, Isla went looking for Ethan. He was standing on the balcony, gazing out at the city. The golden morning light cast a glow over him, making him look both strong and lonely at the same time. She took a deep breath, then stepped beside him. He turned, his eyes flickering with surprise, perhaps because this was the first time Isla had ever sought him out on her own. "You were right," Isla said softly. "I'm not staying because of the past." Ethan said nothing, he just watched her, waiting. Isla clenched her hands. She had never confessed something like this before. But if she didn't say it now, she would regret it forever. "I love you." The words left Isla's lips before she could stop them. And in that moment, everything stilled. Ethan froze. His sharp blue eyes locked onto hers, unreadable, as if he wasn't sure if he had imagined it. Isla's heart pounded. She had spent so long convincing herself this wasn't real, that this wasn't love, but saying it out loud, it felt like the most honest thing she had ever done. "What did you say?" Ethan's voice was rough, uncertain in a way Isla had never heard before. She swallowed hard, took a shaky breath, and then smiled. "I love you, Ethan." This time, there was no hesitation. No obligation, no past debts, just pure, undeniable love. Ethan didn't wait another second. He pulled Isla into his arms, holding her tight. "I've been waiting so long to hear you say that." His voice was rough, filled with emotion, as if he had just let go of a weight he had carried for too long. Isla laughed softly, wrapping her arms around him, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid anymore. She had chosen to stay. For love. And this time, Ethan would never let her go again.